starting off with a document called He Gathers the Lambs in His Arms. This is an oral history of my grandmother, Elizabeth Coop Huebert. I was born on April 5th, 1909 to Heinrich and Susie Coop in Trotskaya, Soviet Union. I was the second youngest of 8 children. Until I was 8 years old, we were a whole family unit. When I was 8 years old, we lived in Taganrog, where my father had a mill. This was in 1917, when the revolution started. During this time, my mother was very sick. While she was still alive, the authorities took my father away and put him in prison a few times. They treated him very badly, but then they let him go. He did not come home because he was afraid that he would be taken again. He hid himself and would come home only at night. In this way, he tried to look after my mother, who was on her deathbed. One night she died, then my father had to run away, and our family was scattered in all directions. So my grandmother lived in different places with different relatives during the next few years. And then when she was a little older, she moved to a place called Shangrao, which was a Mennonite colony. I had not had very much religious training. My parents had been members of a kirchliche congregation, but I had been very young when our family was scattered. After that, I stayed with people who only went to church at Easter and at Pentecost, but not much else. I knew nothing about conversion. During that time, the verse, "He tends his flock like a shepherd, he gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young," from Isaiah 40:11, became precious to me as well. Once again, I do not know where I learned this verse. Later, after I was married, my husband and I decided to read through the Bible. When we came to this verse, I told him that God had already carried me in his arms before I knew him and protected me from a bad lifestyle. When my husband was taken from me, it became even more important to me. This was the extent of my spiritual understanding, but when I came to Chengrao, this all changed. I had only been there a short time when I got to know about my husband-to-be. At first, I didn't know him, but the girls told me, "Nikolai Huebert likes you." When I did meet him, he asked if I was a Christian. I told him I didn't know, and so he suggested that I go to church and he would tell me what it meant to be a believer. He assured me that after a while, I would understand. We were not going out at that time. Between Christmas and New Year's, that first year, we had evangelistic meetings, and at those meetings, I became a believer. I became a different person. I had different thoughts, different ideas, and behaved differently. So my grandmother was trapped in the Soviet Union. She had 4 children, and her husband was taken away by Stalinists, I think. And then it was a hard time. They didn't have a home, they had no food, etc., so on. So hardship. But in August of 1947, my grandmother and her 4 children were called into a concentration camp to prepare for emigration. This was actually a DP camp. My brother Peter had moved to Canada in 1929. From Germany, we had gotten in contact with him and he sponsored us. We arrived in Winnipeg on December 15th, 1947. We joined the North Gladonian Church as soon as we arrived, but we did not get very involved right away. Later, when we lived on Bartle Bay, I was involved in the decorating committee and provided flowers for the church. I was also involved with the Ladies' Fellowship and served as secretary, treasurer, and also helped sew blankets and make up bundles for MCC. She ends with Psalm 103, verse 2. "Praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits," is the verse that has become more and more precious to me in recent years. So for my family and a lot of other families, religion was about their very survival, believing that they survived because of God's protection, and the verses from the Bible kept them in a state of hope during the Revolution and the Second World War in Russia. Thank you.